Good morning. We're going to need this space. Would you like to pray with me before we get into this? Be good. Oh, Lord Jesus, thank you for the reminder this morning through those beautiful songs of praise and through what Lynn has shared with us of what you've done for us and who you are. And I ask this morning that as we just seek to listen to your voice and hear what you have to say to our hearts, that we'd be responsive, that my words would reflect what's on your heart. Thank you that you're with us and you love us. Amen. So we've been going through some different parts of the Gospels and of Acts. And I think last week, Frank talked about Mary and Martha. I wasn't here. Does anyone remember that? Yeah. Was it good? No, it was terrible. Jeff says it was awful. What was your one takeaway from it? Anyone? That's all right. Put you on the spot. I just wasn't here, so I would have liked to hear what Frank had to say. But that's all right. Breakfast was good. Luke and I were in the Barossa having breakfast after a cousin's wedding. But today, the topic that Frank gave me to speak about, I don't know if you've seen in the church newsletter, there's been some readings that have been put together in the lead up to Easter. And the one that I've been given is from, I'm going to put that first, thank you, from Mark. So sorry if that's a little bit small to read, I had to cram it in, but I'll read it to you as well. It's good? You love that child? I love that child too. We're going to talk about that child. So we're talking about Jesus and little children this morning. So this is just from Mark. Now people were bringing little children for him to touch, but the disciples scolded those who brought them. But when Jesus saw this, he was indignant, and he said to them, "Let the little children come to me. Don't try and stop them, for the kingdom of God belongs to such as these. I tell you the truth, whoever does not receive the kingdom of God like a child will never enter it." And he took the children in his arms, placed his hands on them, and blessed them. What are little children like? Yeah, crazy. This particular little child, I don't know if any of you will recognise her. She hasn't been here for a little while, but this is Ayla. So Ayla belongs to my very good friends Dan and Lydia, who have previously been at South Point. Ayla is wild. I have the joy of spending quite a bit of time with her, so I look after her once a fortnight at the moment. And I've been doing that since she was a little baby. So we've gone from her being tiny, holding your arms, to now being 4 and just being full of life. And some of the things that I love about little children, they're just all in. When you're with them, you can't help but get a little bit sucked in to the world that they inhabit. They're creative, they're imaginative. The last time that I was at their house, I came in and she was like, "Janie, do you want to come and play with me?" And I was like, "Oh yeah, okay, I can do that." She's like, "We're going to be hairdressers." I was like, "Oh, great." That's right up my alley, as I'm sure you're all, not really my thing. However, she brought me into her salon and she sat me down in the chair. She gave me her little plastic card. She said, "Now this is your card and you'll have to pay at the end. What would you like?" So then I had to join in. There's 2 ways you can approach this when a kid asks you to play. You can kind of be a little bit like, "Oh, do I have to? This isn't really, it's a bit embarrassing." Or you can just dive in. And what happens when you just dive in? it's great. It's just a return to that freedom of childhood. So I love it when Jesus is saying, become like a little child. What are some other things that little children are like? What have you seen in little children? They're truthful, they're honest. Yeah, what you see, that's right. You would know. Yeah, what you see is what you get. They're very real. They do ask a lot of questions. They're super curious because, the world is new to them. They're full of wonder. They're very trusting. And they love wholeheartedly. When you're loved by a child, you know it, don't you? If you are in their heart, they do not hesitate to let you know. And sometimes it can be hard to get there because things happen. But once you are in a child's heart, when you are a safe person for them, they're all in. They're very whimsical, aren't they? They're imaginative. They can take a pair of plastic scissors and a magazine, and you can be in the hairdressers. It can be a full-on experience. They're also confident. It takes confidence to put on butterfly wings and run around and pretend you're a butterfly. If I did that, I would be worried that people are looking at me going, "Are you all right? What's going on with that?" But what a joy to just express that kind of delight with life. Kids really appreciate beautiful things. They can see beauty in the world around them, even if it's things that we don't necessarily notice as adults, or that we've seen so many times that we're like, oh yeah, that's just a sunrise. It's just a shell on the beach. Have you ever been to the beach with a kid? Have you ever come home with pockets full of things, rocks and sticks and shells and things that you just think, what am I going to do with that? Like, why do you even want that? But to a little child, they're treasure. They're special. They're unique. Unfortunately, by the time we get to adulthood, a lot of things have happened that have taken us away from those beautiful parts of being a child. I'm going to get my very special friend to come and help me for a minute. Come on. He's going to embrace his childlikeness right now. I'm going to get you to stand up here so all the people can see you. So this is little Luke. He was born like everybody's born. Oh, I've gone the wrong way, I think. There we go. So this is another little child of my acquaintance who's very much enjoying life right there. But so little Luke is born. He's born into a family who love him. But unfortunately, at the time that Luke's born, his mum actually gets really sick and isn't able to necessarily spend the time with him as a little baby that he needs. So he gets this first layer of things that start to put a little bit of a barrier between him and life. They start to take away a little bit of his beautiful freedom as a child. And then time moves on, and through no fault of anybody, his family are really busy. They both have to work. He spends time with lovely carers at daycare, but again, he's not getting all the things that he needs from his family. So another layer gets put on. The things that he needs to grow and thrive, they're there, but they're not necessarily fully there. Life goes on. There's more disappointments for little Luke. He goes to school and they find out that he's dyslexic. School's a real struggle for him. It's no one's fault. There's nothing wrong with him, but he's a bit different. He struggles to learn, and that adds another little layer over the top of him that takes away a little bit of his joy and his delight in life. Life is a bit hard. And it goes on. So you know that when we start to get to our teenage years, we start to put away a lot of those things that we love as little children. Can you imagine a teenager putting on their butterfly wings and running through? I mean, I'd love it if they were doing that. Like, it's a wonderful expression of who they are. But most of the time they'd be like, oh, I don't know if I want to do that. Because what happens? We start to compare, don't we? We look at other people and we think, oh, I'm not quite like them. Maybe I'm not okay. And another layer goes on. So when we've lived through these disappointments, we've had some broken trust in our lives. Maybe people have disappointed us. Maybe we have been a bit neglected. Maybe it's even gone further. There's been abuse in our life. That's a sad reality for a lot of us. Fear starts to set in. And we start to build more layers. We start to protect ourselves. We start to make ourselves look okay on the outside. And a lot of our growing up is about learning to protect ourselves. There's good in that, but there's also a negative side of that, because sometimes we can protect ourselves so much and try and make ourselves look so much like the people around us we want to accept us, that we lose who we really are. We cover up our identity, that beautiful childlike spirit and heart that God has made us to be. And we end up adults. This is actually quite a sacrifice, thank you, darling. You must be very warm. But we end up adults who look respectable, we look in control, we look confident, and we look safe. So grown-up Luke has a good job, he makes a good income, he's found a wife that he loves, he's got a family that he tries to protect and care for, he's got a lot of responsibilities. But is he really happy? Is he really free? He loves Jesus. He goes to church. He plays in the church band. He's given his heart to Jesus, but there's something else going on there. Things aren't quite as they should be. Thanks, love. You can sit down now. You can get undressed. Maybe don't take off all the layers up here, but So a lot of us are like that. Have you ever felt like that? Like you've got layer on layer on layer on top of you? And like you'd love to get back to putting on your butterfly wings and running through the park? I want to ask you to do another really childlike thing now. A thing that maybe some of you haven't done for a long time. And maybe some of you do it all the time, which is wonderful. But I want you to listen to a story. So I'm going to read to you. And I'm going to read you a part out of one of my favourite books by one of my favourite authors. So this is from The Voyage of the Dawn Treader by C.S. Lewis. And I'm not going to give you too much backstory, because there's a lot of backstory, and you need to go and read all the books yourself, because they're really good. But one of the core things in my life has always been stories. And there's stories in the Bible. Jesus used stories a lot to help us connect with the things that he was saying, to help us understand. And in this story, the main protagonist is a boy called Eustace. Eustace is not a nice person. In fact, C.S. Lewis says that he's a very unchildlike child. He's been raised to consider all the important things like economics and world trade and geography and politics. He's never had a chance to learn how to imagine or to play or to be free. And as a result, he's a pretty unpleasant human. He spends his whole time lording it over his cousins and saying, well, why would you play silly games like that? I don't know about your imaginary things, that's no good, you're just silly. And makes himself quite unpleasant. And so he is drawn into Narnia with his cousins Lucy and Edmund, and they start out on this amazing adventure on the ship, the Dawn Treader, going out to see new things and see if they can get to what's essentially heaven. So they're sailing for the end of the earth to Aslan's country. And the whole way along, Eustace just makes a pain in the bottom of himself. He's unpleasant, he complains about everything, he can't enjoy the adventure at all. And we're going to pick up the story where they have just been shipwrecked on an island. And it's called Dragon Island, but they don't know why. And Eustace has come across the reason it's called Dragon Island. There's a giant dragon, and it's sitting in front of a cave. And the cave is full of treasure. And Eustace is thinking, I'm going to get one over on all the people there. I'm going to go away and be away from them, and they will have to look for me because they don't care about me, and so I'm going to make them care. So he's basically run away. And this is what's happened. He's gone to sleep on a pile of treasure after thinking, oh my goodness, I can take all this treasure and I can become the most important and the most rich. And he takes a golden armband and he sticks it on his arm and he's like, right, now that I'm rich, everybody will have to like me. And he falls asleep. But then he wakes up and he's horrified because right next to him are two giant dragon claws on either side of him. Rising in front of him is a curl of smoke. There's a dragon really close by. And he starts to run. He runs out of the cave. And this is what happens as he runs out of the cave. He's trying to get into a pool. But just as he reached the edge of the pool, two things happened. First of all, it came over him like a thunderclap that he'd been running on all fours. Why on earth had he been doing that? And secondly, as he bent toward the water, he thought for a second that yet another dragon was staring up at him out of the pool. But in an instant, he realized the truth. The dragon face in the pool was his own reflection. There was no doubt of it. It moved as he moved. It opened and shut its mouth as he opened and shut his. He had turned into a dragon while he was asleep. Sleeping on a dragon's hoard with greedy, dragonish thoughts in his heart, he had become a dragon himself. And I think a lot of us can relate to that in some way. I know that I've become a dragon sometimes in my life. Shh, you stay out of it. Things pile up and we get a thick, hard, scaly skin. Maybe we have selfish, dragonish thoughts sometimes. Now, Eustace has a bit of a choice here. He realises he's stuck. He can't undragon himself. And his first response is panic, and then he realises he needs to go back to his friends. And becoming a dragon means that he starts to become a nicer human, ironically, because he goes back to his friends, and through their kind questioning and their acceptance, they realise who he is. They realise that this is Eustace turned into a dragon, and they don't immediately abandon him. They try and help him, and he becomes a bit more useful. He stops being completely stubborn and horrible and starts doing things to help. He goes and hunts for food for them. He cuts down trees to help them repair their shipwrecked ship. But still, every night, he's miserable. He spends all his time thinking, how could anyone love me? How could anyone think that I'm all right? I'm hideous. It's terrible. This is the end of me. And then one night, something strange happens. So I want you to close your eyes and just listen to the story. Imagine what's going on. About 6 days after they'd landed on Dragon Island, Edmund happened to wake up very early one morning. It was just getting grey, so you could see the treetops if they were between you and the bay, but not in the other direction. As he woke, he thought he heard something moving, so he raised himself on one elbow and looked about him. And presently, he thought he saw a dark figure moving on the seaward side of the wood. The idea that once occurred to his mind was, are we so sure there's no natives on this island? Then he thought it was Caspian. It was about the right size. But he knew that Caspian had been sleeping next to him, and he could see that he hadn't moved. Edmund made sure that his sword was in its place, and then he rose to investigate. He came down softly to the edge of the wood, and the dark figure was still there. He saw now that it was too small for Caspian and too big for Lucy. It didn't run away. Edmund drew his sword and was about to challenge the stranger when the stranger said in a low voice, "Is that you, Edmund?" "Yes, who are you?" he said. "Don't you know me?" said the other. "It's me, Eustace." "By Jove," said Edmund, "so it is, my dear chap." "Hush," said Eustace, and lurched as if he was going to fall. "Hello," said Edmund, steadying him. "What's up? Are you ill?" Eustace was silent for so long that Edmund thought he was fainting. But at last he said, "It's been awful. You don't know. But it's all right now. Could we go and talk somewhere? I don't want to meet the others just yet." "Yeah, anywhere you like," said Edmund. "We can go sit on the rocks over there. I say, I am glad to see you looking, well, yourself again. You must have had a pretty bad time." They went to the rocks and sat down, looking out across the bay while the sky got paler and paler and the stars disappeared, except for one very bright one, low down and near the horizon. "I won't tell you how I became a dragon till I can tell the others and get it over with," said Eustace. "By the way, I didn't even realise I was a dragon until I heard you all using that word when I turned up here the other morning. I want to tell you how I stopped being one." "Fire away," said Edmund. "Well, last night I was more miserable than ever, and that terrible arm ring was hurting like anything." "Is that all right now?" Eustace laughed, a different laugh from any that Edmund had ever heard him give before, and slipped the bracelet easily off his arm. "There it is," he said, "and anyone who likes it can have it as far as I'm concerned." Well, as I say, I was lying awake and wondering what on earth would become of me. And then, but mind you, this may have all been a dream. I don't really know. "Go on," said Edmund, with considerable patience. "Well, anyway, I looked up and I saw the very last thing I expected, a huge lion coming slowly toward me. And one odd thing was that there was no moon last night, but there was moonlight where the lion was. So it came nearer and nearer. I was terribly afraid of it. You may think that being a dragon, I could have knocked any lion out easily enough. But it wasn't that kind of fear. I wasn't afraid of it eating me. I was afraid of it. If you can understand that. Well, it came closer to me and looked me straight in my eyes. and I shut my eyes tight. But that wasn't any good, because it told me to follow it. You mean it spoke? I don't know. Now that you mention it, I don't think it did. But it told me all the same. And I knew I'd have to do what it told me. So I got up and followed it. And it led me a long way into the mountains. And there was always this moonlight over and round the lion wherever we went. So at last we came to the top of a mountain I'd never seen before. And on the top of this mountain, there was a garden, trees and fruit and everything. In the middle of it, there was a well. I knew it was a well because you could see the water bubbling up from the bottom of it, but it was a lot bigger than most wells, like a very big round bath with marble steps going down into it. The water was as clear as anything, and I thought, if I could get in there and bathe, it would ease the pain in my leg. But the lion told me I must undress first. Mind you, I don't know if he said any words out loud or not. And I was just going to say that I couldn't undress because I hadn't got any clothes on, when I suddenly thought, dragons are snaky kind of things, and snakes can cast their skins. Of course, I thought, that's what the lion means. So I started scratching myself, and my scales started falling off all over the place. And then I scratched a little deeper, and instead of just scales coming off here and there, my whole skin started peeling off beautifully, like it does after an illness, or as if I was a banana. In a minute or two, I stepped out of it. I could see it lying there beside me, looking rather nasty. It was a most lovely feeling. So I started to go down into the well for my bath. But just as I was going to put my foot in the water, I looked down and I saw that it was all hard and rough and wrinkled and scaly, just as it had been before. That's all right, I thought. It only means I had another smaller suit on underneath, and I'll have to get out of it too. So I scratched and tore again, and this underskin peeled off beautifully, and out I stepped and left it lying beside the other one, and went down into the well for my bath. Well, exactly the same thing happened again. And I thought to myself, however many skins have I got to take off? For I was longing to bathe my leg. So I scratched away for the third time and got off a third skin, just like the other two. And I stepped out of it. But as soon as I looked at myself in the water, I knew it was no good. Then the lion said, "You'll have to let me undress you." I was afraid of his claws, I can tell you, but I was pretty nearly desperate by now. So I just lay down flat on my back to let him do it. The very first tear that he made went so deep that I thought he'd gone right into my heart. And when he began pulling the skin off, it hurt worse than anything I've ever felt. The only thing that made me able to bear it was just the pleasure of feeling all of that stuff peel off. You know what that's like if you've ever picked the scab on a sore place. It hurts like crazy, but it's so fun to see it coming away. "I know just what you mean," said Edmund. Well, he peeled that stuff right off, just as I thought I'd done myself the other 3 times. Only they hadn't hurt. And there it was, lying on the grass, only ever so much thicker and darker and more knobbly looking than the others had been. And there was I, soft and smooth as a peeled switch, and much smaller than I'd been. Then he caught hold of me. I didn't like that very much, for I was very tender underneath now that I'd no skin on. And he threw me into the water. It hurt like anything, but only for a moment. After that, it became perfectly delicious. And as soon as I started swimming and splashing, I found that all the pain had gone from my arm. And then I saw why. I turned into a boy again. You'd think me simply phony if I told you how I felt about my own arms. I know they've no muscle and they're mouldy compared to Caspian's, but I was so glad to see them. After a bit, the lion took me out and dressed me. Dressed you? With his paws? Well, I don't exactly remember that bit, but he did, somehow or other. In new clothes, the same I've got on now. And then suddenly I was back here, which makes me think it must have been a dream. It wasn't a dream, said Edmund. Why not? Well, there's the clothes for one thing, and you have been, well, undragoned. What do you think it was then? Asked Eustace. I think you've seen Aslan, said Edmund. Aslan? Said Eustace. I've heard that name mentioned several times since we joined the Dawn Treader, and I felt, I don't know what, hated it. But I was hating everything then. And by the way, I'd like to apologise. I'm afraid I've been pretty awful. That's all right, said Edmund. Between ourselves, you haven't been half as bad as I was on my first trip to Narnia. You were only an ass, but I was a traitor. Well, don't tell me about it then, said Edmund. But who is Aslan? Do you know him? Well, he knows me, said Edmund. He's the great lion, the son of the emperor over the sea, who saved me and saved Narnia. We've all seen him. Lucy sees him most often, and it may be Aslan's country that we are sailing to. So we need to become undragoned sometimes, don't we? The layers build up. And we need to get back to that place of trust and freedom to be who God intended us to be. To express ourselves in the way that God made us to, without worrying what other people think of us, without comparing ourselves, without being covered in so much shame and guilt and fear that we miss the incredible beauty of the kingdom of heaven that's all around us. You know, Jesus talks a fair bit about becoming like a little child and references kind of children and mothers. And, you know, he says to the Pharisees at one point, Jerusalem, Jerusalem, I long to gather your children together as a hen gathers her chicks under her wing, but you weren't willing. And there is that point, I think, that comes for all of us, whether it's through things that happen to us, the circumstances that are put on us, and the way we respond to those, or through our own sin responses to things, where we are just like a dragon. And sometimes the dragon doesn't look dragony. You know, sometimes the dragon looks like grown-up, successful Luke with his good job and his family and, you know, all the things that look like they're all in a row. But in our hearts, we're crying out. Because being childlike isn't about not having responsibility and, you know, doing whatever you want, but it's about how we approach the world. It's about coming back to that place of confidence and joy and hope. Because I think that's one of the things that I love most about little children, is that every day is a new adventure. They're very quick to let go and forget what happened yesterday and to embrace what's in today. And as we move in the world, I think it's so important that we move back to being childlike. That we are the people who are full of wonder, who are curious, who are hopeful, who are unafraid. And not because the world isn't a tough place, not because bad things don't happen or that we just push aside all the kind of reality, but because we know who our dad is, and we have that trust and that faith, like a little child, in your father who loves you or your mother who loves you, that when we walk into the room, we will be welcomed. Someone asked me once, when I was kind of in the middle of my struggle back to faith, if God the Father was sat here, where would you be in the room? And the reality for me at that point was that I had all my dragon skin on. I was self-protecting in all the worst kind of ways. You know, I'd put layer upon layer upon layer over my heart because I was afraid. And I'd been hurt. And I was untrusting. And I was very cynical and sarcastic because I couldn't bear to hope anymore because I felt like my heart had been broken. And I said, I'd be standing in the doorway, like ready to make a quick getaway because I don't trust. Because I've lost that childlike ability to believe that someone loves me so much that they will always welcome me. And so when I finally let Jesus undragon me, when I lay down on my back and I said, okay, take off all the layers, it hurt. I cried for about 3 years straight because there was a lot of stuff there. There was a lot of things that I needed to unpack. But let me tell you, God is faithful. And now, if you asked me, what would you do if you walked into the room where God is? I would run and hurl myself into his arms because that's who he is. That's who he is for every one of you. You are a much loved child and you can move in the world in that freedom and that joy. No matter what the storms are that you're going through, as Lynn's already reminded us, you are a much loved child. It doesn't take away the things that are hard, but it makes them so much easier to bear. So let's move in the world as much loved children. Let's take that out and be that for the people around us. And if you feel like you're not there yet, that's okay. Jesus is not going to let you go. He's not going to stop the journey until you understand his heart. And for all of us, I think that's a forever job. You know, there's always things that we're learning about him. The depths of his love are unfathomable. And so if that's touched something in you, if you think there's a bit of dragon that needs to go, I'll be up here and I'm happy to pray with you. And there's other people, you know, there's elders here, there's other faithful people in our congregation who I'm sure if you speak to them, will be happy to speak with you about that. But even if all you do is this week, just get alone with Jesus and say, help me take off the layers. It's a really good step. And if you've never, ever met Jesus before, it's a great opportunity to walk into the room and just say, Jesus, I'm here. I want to be your much-loved child. Shall we pray?